because I wasn't smart enough to send it out earlier. Talking about how I really want you guys to be prepared and taking notes and identifying what we're going to talk about. I would encourage you all very much so this week to go back and re-watch this sermon or re-listen to this sermon or whatever it is so that you get this information, because we're going to talk about a lot of stuff over the next few weeks. And again, I sent out an email talking about kind of give an overview of what the topics are going to be about, but gosh, I've thought about how to start all this, and I'm still not exactly sure how to do it. A guy by the name of David Kinnaman, a few years ago, started researching, actually I say a few years ago, several years ago, started researching why things have shifted so much. In other words, why is it that a generation, 2 generations later, people don't really want to go to church? What's going on with the Christians? What's going on with the Christian movement in America? And researching thousands and thousands of people. And he wrote a book called Unchristian, talking about how really the church has a publicity problem. We have an image problem, and there's so many things that the church overall does that is we got to get in our own way. But some of the stuff he talked about in that book was absolutely stunning to me. And again, this is after years of research. And I know all the arguments. You can make statistics say whatever you want them to say. And out of all the surveys you ever hear about, probably nobody in this room was ever called and asked to be a part of those surveys, so how do they represent us? And I understand all that, but that said and that aside, the information that he gave was pretty stunning. For example, to understand the statistics I'm about to give you, there's 4 areas or 4 groups of people we have to identify. The most famous group of people in our society are the baby boomers. You've heard this group talked about a lot. Several in this room would be in that class. The children that came along after World War II. The baby boomers being around the late 50s down to the early 40s. That's one of the classes that he talks about. Another group of people are the ones above that he classifies as the elder, not elderly or elder or like that, but it's the 60-plus crowd. So you got the elder, you've got the boomers, but then there's the groups below that. The group right below the boomers is called the busters, the baby busters. This is a group that is in their late 30s down to their late 20s or so. And then from there on down, from that group down to the late teens are called the mosaics. If you ever hear of a church that calls themselves the Mosaic Church, that is a church that is saying up front in their title, this is the kind of people, this is the group of people that we are targeting. The late teens, early 20s, early 30 group. Mosaic, whatever. So you have the Mosaics, the younger ones. You have the Busters, those in the 20s to 30s. You have the 20s to 30, late 30s. You have the Boomers on up into the 40s and 50s, and you have the Elders from the 60s on over. So he identifies these 4 different groups of people. And in the statistics I'm about to give you, he puts the Mosaics and the Busters together, calling them the young adults. Then you have the Boomers and the Elders as the older adults. And in surveying the people in America and identifying numbers, he identified that 65% in the Mosaics and the Busters, in the young adults, 65% of young adults in America have made a personal commitment to Jesus that is still important in their lives. 65%. You look at that and you listen to that and you go, hey, that's pretty hopeful. And you would think in the older group, the older adults, those boomers and elders, that the number would be higher. And you'd be right. 73% of them identify the phrase and agree with the phrase that they have made a personal commitment to Jesus that is still important in their life. 65% young adults, 73% older adults. Then he asks the question, are you absolutely committed to your Christian faith? The older adults go from 73% to 48%. Pretty good jump. Pretty good drop. 73% say, yeah, I have a personal commitment. 48%, I guess you could say I'm committed to it. Don't push me or nothing, but yeah, I guess. Young adults, 65% have a personal commitment. 29% would identify themselves as committed. 65% drop, 65 to 29%. But here's where it got really interesting for me. Of the older adults, those that would identify truthfully that they owned a Bible, didn't read it, don't have it on the coffee table, that they owned a Bible. 73% is what it was that said they have a personal relationship. 9% own a Bible. Guess what? Young adults, 3% own a Bible. 60% say, yes, I have committed to Jesus. I have a relationship. Now you want to push me on commitment and say that it's actually important to me, less than 30%. How many of you have a rule book or a textbook or the Bible that you want to read that gives you about that? Oh, well, 3%. Now, out of the 3%, I'd be willing to bet you any amount of Steve Lever's money that less than 30% actually read it. You probably go to 10 or 15%, and you probably wouldn't be too far off. So you're talking about a very minute group of people that actually call themselves Christians, that say that they actually own a Bible. The first thing we did when we were getting ready to launch the church, we bought, how many, Kate? Half a dozen boxes of Bibles. Because we knew coming in, people wouldn't have them. That's why I teach out this. That's why whenever I tell you, if you turn to whatever in your church Bible, that's page 811, which is what it's going to be today, Ephesians chapter 2. It's because I know people don't have Bibles. Now we've been in existence. We launched the church. This March it'll be 3 years. What you see on the table is all we got left. And this Bible's out of print. They don't print this particular one anymore. We haven't ordered new ones because I don't want to have 3 Bibles on the podium and say, well, if you have this church Bible, it's page 811. If you have this church Bible, it's page 63. If it's, you have this church Bible, it's page 964. I can't keep up with all that, so I don't know what we're going to do about that yet. But anyway, we don't own Bibles. Now, I'm not talking about just a person on the common street. I'm talking about Christians. I'm talking about people who say, yes, I've given my life to Christ. Less than half of them would say that they're actually committed to Christ, and 1/10 of 1% actually have a Bible that they would actually even look at if they thought about doing it. But it gets worse. What is it that you think you believe? What is it that we say, I believe? What do we believe? Most of the time we as Christians don't know what we believe, and we couldn't tell you why we believe what we believe if you put a gun to our head. Because Grandma told me to believe. What is interesting is that he identified in this book what is known as a biblical worldview. The view that you have of the world filtered through biblical teaching, a biblical worldview. The biblical worldview is identified with 8 points, and these are in no particular order. That Jesus lived a sinless life. That God is all-powerful and all-knowing, and He is the Creator, and He still rules today. That salvation is a gift from God and cannot be earned. That Satan is real. That Christians are responsible to share their faith in God. That the Bible is true and it is accurate. That moral truths really do exist, and that moral truths are defined by the Bible. 8 points. By the way, when I use the word postmodern world, do you know what that is? Because you live in it. You live right smack dab in the middle of it. Do you know what it is? Because the postmodern world will tell you there is no such thing as truth. It doesn't exist. And yet the biblical worldview would identify as one of its key ingredients that not only moral truths do exist, but that the Bible is the measuring stick. Now here's where it gets even interesting.